Hey guys, it's Paul, combat veteran, MMA fighter, YouTuber, and today we are checking out the next part of Bricky's Every Faction in Wh40k Explained. This one kicks it off with the Chaos Space Marines, and let's get into it.
So Horse and all of his boys, all of them in the Primarchs, they have all also become Chaos Boys, and they all have their own special Chaos Legions, specializing in so many different things, just like the Adeptus Astartes, the Angels of Death, the regular Space Marines. Chaos Space Marines aren't a whole lot different than the regular Space Marines. They have the same armor, generally the same training and toughness. They just specialize in different kinds of things. And also a lot of the Primarchs have ascended into greater greater demons? They're Daemon Primarchs at this point. Gigantic, horrifying man-demon hybrids that are pretty awesome, if I'm going to be honest. They look really, really cool. But them and their associated legions that they are a part of are all kind of going out there and causing a large ruckus for everyone else.
So I guess I have some questions. I mean, I have a lot of questions, and maybe he'll get to these later. But one, so the Chaos Space Marines still operate as legions. So they're 100,000 Space Marines at a time, whereas the non-corrupted Space Marines are still just chapters of 1,000. Second, what's the end game for Chaos here? Is it literally just, if you're a worshiper of Khorne, you just want to maximize the amount of bloodshed and you don't really have like a longer term plan?
Khorne will always have blood, yours or theirs.
If you're a Slaaneshi demon, like what is the conquest that you're going for? Like, again, I can sort of see Khorne and conquest, and there's an internally consistent logic. But like, what does Slaanesh gain from taking over like a whole star system?
Considering the raw strength and firepower of a legion of Space Marines, imagine that entire legion just converting to chaos and immediately fighting you. It's generally pretty horrifying. There's a lot of them, so I gotta write them down, but you've got the Emperor's Children with Primarch Fulgrim, loyal to Slaanesh. These people, they are some messed up people. They're just sensory overload, tons of drugs, tons of torture. And I think Fulgrim is a Daemon Primarch right now, and oh god, I am terrified to see what that man looks like, at least on the tabletop, because Emperor's Children are not good people. You've got the Iron Warriors, which are kind of like opposite of the Imperial Fists, with Primarch Pt2, I believe is his name. They're Chaos Undivided. They just kind of serve Chaos in a general aspect instead of choosing one of the four. But the Iron Warriors are big on the siege and fortification, and they're basically entirely against the Imperial Fists and a major rival. Pt2, I believe, is also still alive, and I'm also very interested to see what he looks like, because Daemon Primarchs are badass. You've got the Night Lords with Primarch.
Do these guys also recruit? Like, what happens? Do they just follow, or do they just solely exist to corrupt Space Marines? Because it's sort of interesting, right, that even though Space Marines seem like they're pretty individualistic, that whole legions turn traitor at once. I think there's like one exception, but that basically if your Primarch turns traitor, turns chaos, you turn to chaos in the exact same way, right? The same, if your Primarch is a Slaaneshi chaos god, or chaos demigod, then you are following that chaos demigod, regardless of the fact that it goes against your entire religion. It seems sort of weird. Again, lore experts, you got to help me out here.
Conrad Kurz. Conrad Kurz is dead, which is good because he's a sick fuck. But the Night Lords are generally about terrorizing people, and terrorism. They're generally about fear, and rightly so. You've got the World Eaters with Primarch Angron, still alive, also excited to see. Angron, if you think you've known an angry person, Angron is the angriest son of a bitch you will ever know.
What did the Emperor expect when he made a Primarch named Angron? I mean, I get it, it's Games Workshop, etc. But come on, man, Angron? You know he's gonna be angry. You stuck it right there in his name. And why would you make a Primarch who's extra angry when you're the Emperor?
No, Angron removed parts of his brain that didn't make him angry, so he could be angrier. Angron. Fucker's mad. You've got the Death Guard with Primarch Mort.
Okay, I just want to point something out, right? And this is... this is an MMA thing. A lot of people who don't participate in a fighting combat sport have this belief that before you fight, you want to tap into this like emotion, this really strong emotion, right? Usually it's like anger, you know, do you hate your opponent, right? And, you know, professional MMA really doesn't do a very good job of sort of countering this stereotype, right? Because when fighters talk a lot of smack on each other, it really sells fights. It really, you know, it makes you, the fans, get fired up. But the truth is that you always want, when you're fighting, to be as collected as possible, right? You want to have the mind, the clarity of mind, the same clarity of mind that you would have if you were going to play like poker or chess, right? You want to be very focused, not distracted, but in a very cerebral state with a bare minimum of emotions. Now, don't get me wrong, fighting in a cage is designed to be a spectacle, right? In front of a crowd, it's loud, and you're going to have some emotions, right? They're going to, probably anxiety. That's the dominant one, given that someone else is going to try to beat you into a pulp. But, you know, you want to try to suppress those because you have to be strategic with how you fight. And, of course, the same thing happens in combat, right? It's a stereotype of people panicking and not being able to think through the steps they have to take in response to a combat situation. So, when I hear about Primarchs who triple down on emotion like this, right, who become just pure anger, you got to ask yourself, how can this person think clearly? I mean, think of all the dumb stuff that we've all said in the heat of a moment, right? And imagine how many more dumb decisions you could make if you were totally super angry and in charge of a legion of Space Marines, right? You'd make so many mistakes, right? Having a general who's in constant state of rage would be the best possible thing, the best possible state that you could put a leader in. This is actually why you see fighters sometimes actually like smack talk their opponent in the cage. They taunt them, they dance around, they like sometimes even give each other the middle finger, and that is to actually get under their skin and make them make either poor decisions, charge in recklessly, abandon their game plan, set a faster pace than they think their opponent can sustain. It's classic. It's classic, and it's a great tactic because it works.
Mortarion, they actually have their own special codex and their own major army on the tabletop. Mortarion himself is actually one of the models, and look at him. Look at him. It's so cool looking. Of course, Nurgle based, obviously. So very slow, but very tanky. You've got the Word Bearers with Primarch Lorgar. Lorgar is, I believe, still alive. I don't know what's up with him at the current moment, but the Word Bearers are generally the people who caused all the major problems in the beginning. At least I blame them for it. They're little assholes. You got the Black Legion with Primarch Horus. Get fucked, nerd. You've got the Alpha.
Okay, I thought Horus was like 1,000,000% dead. I thought the Emperor like killed him and then like obliterated his soul.
Legion with Primarch Alfarius Omegon. Chaos, I think. And then finally, you've got the Thousand Sons with Primarch Magnus the Nerd. The Thousand Sons also have their own book, just like the Death Guard. Magnus is also a tabletop model. He looks super cool.
What is with that unusual breastplate? And the hair. I have a lot of questions.
As you can tell, and they're all super heavily Psyker and kind of Egyptian themed. They look pretty neat. But overall, with all of these Chaos Space Marine factions, you can play as a lot of different ones, but the main ones that you can really work at are standard Space Marines, Chaos Space Marines, as well as the Death Guard and Thousand Sons, as they are the most fleshed out, especially on the tabletop at least. See this right here, this is a really good way to describe the Chaos Space Marines. What the thick-headed fools with their broken corpse of an emperor fail to understand is that not only can they never defeat us, but they cannot hide or flee or shield themselves from the triumph of chaos. They are finite and we are unbound, undivided. They must not err, or they shall fall to heresy. All who fall join our cause. Every imperial fool who dares to open his eyes is a willing recruit. They strive merely to hold back our fury and might, and it consumes them. Thus, you can see chaos is inevitable. We lurk not only beyond their grasp and at their gates, we lurk within the darkness of their souls, on the tip of their tongues, in their tortured dreams. We are them, but freed from the shackles of ignorance. We are them, grown strong, evolved. We are them, but so much more. As hardcore as that quote is, the saddest part is they're mostly right. Chaos is basically unkillable. You could probably get rid...
Yeah, I think actually in lore, right, isn't there's some short story about a ship that goes all the way, like gets caught in a warp storm, gets spit out at the end of the time, and Chaos has won. I mean, it kind of makes sense, right? Based on probably what he's going to go into here, that, yeah, you can't really beat it, right? It's a feeling. It's intrinsic to human beings. Though, again, all beings, I guess. I guess you could probably... I wonder if you could kill it by, like, exterminating all beings with a warp presence and just letting the galaxy get run by, like, Necron and Tau.
Of Space Marines, a decent amount, the Chaos Space Marines, that is. But every soul that dies goes to the warp. Every Chaos soul will end up back in the warp. And depending on how hard you killed them, they will come back at some point. Every demon you banish will return at some point. Chaos is unstoppable. The warp is unending. And while maybe there is...
What's interesting is this sounds a little bit like an actual scientific principle called entropy. Elon Musk's baby mama has an entire song dedicated to it, in fact. And the principle of entropy just says that systems tend to settle into their lowest energy state. And what that means in practice is that when you have anything constructed or arranged in a way that sort of defies the low energy default, that there's constant force pulling it down. So an example, the classic example, right, is a building, right? Most of the buildings that have ever been built in human history have eventually fallen down and crumbled, right? It's like the poem Ozymandias. And that's because, of course, that the lowest energy state of any collection of bricks and beams is going to be scattered on the ground. Right? It's a higher energy state. It requires you to pour energy into the system to build it up into a building that sort of stays up. And this applies all over the universe, and the scientific theory is that there's actually a potential end of the universe trillions and trillions of years from now called the heat death of the universe. And that is where all matter has defaulted to its lowest energy state. And that means that the entire universe is just a tiny, undifferentiated blanket of 1 degree Kelvin space spread across the entire universe with just like a thin layer of energy all across. And, you know, that would be the heat. It's called the heat death of the universe, right? Time itself would stop, given that there would be no change, nothing altering in matter whatsoever. Kind of dark to think about, but a potentially, you know, sort of real physical manifestation of kind of this sort of end state of chaos.
At some point, some way to stop them somehow, the resources to do so, the requirements to do so, are so far beyond the reaches of man and the other races at the current moment that really it's just an unstoppable force that...
Can't the Necrons kill gods? Don't the Necrons have like a decent track record of killing gods? Or are those like lesser, like piddly gods?
Keeps on coming and is just barely being slowed. Chaos is by far the biggest threat. They are without number, their legions are everywhere, and yeah, they're pretty scary. So, I promise, we're done with humans now. Let's talk about some Xenos. So let's talk about the Eldar, or also known as the Eldari, which are a super hyper-specialized and very technologically advanced race of, well, elf people. They were, as well, responsible for the creation of Slaanesh, the newest demon god. How'd they do that? Debauchery on a world-ending scale. See, back in the day, it was just Khorne, Tzeentch, and Nurgle. And the Eldar are very, very ancient. Millions of years. These Eldar, however, have a bit of a sensory problem. You know, every kind of pain or feeling that you have is a little bit amplified compared to the normal. However, with Eldar, as their race advanced so excessively, and they became so self-reliant, and everything became so easy, there was no requirement for food production anymore, there was no shortages, everything was basically done. Everyone was so comfortable, and that comfort breeded this weird sedation, and that sedation breeded the requirement for more and more debauchery.
Debauchery!
Yeah, this seems like one of those universe-spanning versions of hard times make hard men make good times. But like in human history, at least, that doesn't appear to be the case. I mean, I guess it's tough to say, right? The Eldar, as he discusses, have a totally different psyche, a totally different mentation of the world. And so, yeah, maybe someone like that would just become a complete degenerate. But I think about, like, when you talk to people who have retired really early, some of them just, yeah, they do kind of just, like, do nothing. But again, there's your entropy, right? Default to the lowest energy state, kind of human beings with the absence of any impetus to do anything will just sort of settle into this, like, really low energy state, which is, you know, an evolutionary tactic, right? If you don't need to go out and do something, you should conserve your energy. So I don't think it's super likely that a society that has all basic needs met would digress into like active decadence. I think you would have a lot of people who do very little, right? And you would have a subset of people, I'm going to say 1 in 3, who would actually seek out productive or pseudo-productive work. I'm thinking things like making art, making dumb YouTube videos, you know, the sort of things that are not necessarily like productive with a capital P, but are still outlets to energy that involve some level of effort and trying. But again, that's the human psyche. Eldar, totally different psych profile, non-human, and so who knows what they... Well, we know what they did when they had access to everything they ever wanted. They, you know, murder screwed a god into existence.
Debauchery!
Debauchery!
When everything you have can be so easily acquired, you will end up down this road of pure debauchery. All of the senses the Eldar had that were so powerful, things like feeling, happiness, sadness, and just evil and good, all needed to be satisfied and satiated. And the desire to satiate these senses grew more and more with worse and worse debauchery. It started off with things like sex and drugs becoming so much more rampant because these are the first things you generally turn to when requirements for living are so easily accessible. It would get to the point that made Sander Cohen in BioShock look sane. All right, this is the kind of debauchery it led to. It was constantly satisfying and satiating these sexual and sadistic or masochistic fantasies that only elevated and elevated, and this was species-wide. People started going down darker, more depraved, and more violent paths as time went on.
So it is kind of interesting to think, right? I mean, when in the history of Games Workshop were the Eldar created, right? Did it predate the internet? Because I feel like if you saw the internet and you experienced certain corners of it, you may actually be like, okay, this is like an exaggerated parody of kind of the developed world with access to the internet, right? A lot of free time, a lot of rabbit holes, and you turn around and the next thing you know, you're ranting and raving to your parents about how the world is really flat and why don't they just open their eyes and stop being sheeple.
It is not a globe.
Maybe that's the Eldar version of this. Maybe just all the Eldar just joined rando cults. Again, lore experts, I depend on you to flesh this out for me.
However, some people didn't entirely take to that. Some of the Eldar were looking at this depraved species that they had become and said, no thanks for me, dog, I'm good. And they bailed. These are the Craft World Eldar. They left on these giant continent-sized starships called Craft Worlds. They believed in learning the old ways of the Eldar and pushing away from this depravity and debauchery and going back to their main roots. And so they would segment themselves on these giant craft worlds far in the outer reaches of space. They even had this thing called the Webway. Remember what we mentioned about?
Yeah, what's interesting is that, again, for human beings, historically, right? If you have this subsistence level existence, there's generally so much effort that goes into subsisting that ambition never really shows up. Now, as you get energy into your system beyond just sustenance, what human societies tend to do is empire build, right? This is why you see the first empires show up in places like the Fertile Crescent or the Mexico City Valley, whose name escapes me, but these are really fertile areas where small societies are able to produce more food than they consume. They then are able to divert some of their people away from agriculture and into specialized roles. Those tend to be religious. Those may be, again, the bureaucracy needed to sustain an empire, and of course into warfighting roles, right? Especially you're talking about, again, in a Stone or Bronze Age society, young, healthy men being able to divert them out entirely for some period of the year into warfare and conquering. So you end up seeing this sort of ambition. And again, in early human history, a lot of it is violence, but I think what you see that continue today. You also see a kind of impulse towards world building, I'm going to say, improvement. I think that is actually much more likely what you would see. Instead of enslaving whole races that it appeared the Eldar were doing, you are likely to see them go in and say, okay, let's try to free oppressed races. Let's try to give technology to these poorer races. Let's elevate them up, right? Engage in a certain level of pro-social behavior instead of anti-social debauchery. Again, this is probably what humans seem to do, not necessarily what someone like the Eldar would do.
About warp travel with the Imperium, well, the Eldar had something way safer called a Webway. And the Eldar Webway is actually like a pocket dimension kind of thing. And in that pocket dimension, there were also more horrible, depraved groups and clans that would spend their time in there. And if you imagine the debauchery was bad already, these were debauchery X10. So all of this continued, and it bloated.
See, that's what's so interesting, right? You have all your needs met, everything is good, and the Eldar, right, some of them clearly put their energy into building this very elaborate, safe webway to transfer all over the galaxy, and some of them just kept on doing drugs and, screwing around. So it's sort of puzzling to me that you see those two impulses seem to show up in the Eldar, right? The urge to say, hey, we've got this perfect society, all needs are met, but can we make it better? Can we make it safer to travel interstellar distances? And some of them said yes, and some of them were like, no, I'd rather just do drugs. So, again, maybe they're not that different psychologically from human beings.
Until Slaanesh just burst forth. All that emotion, all that mental, thought processes, I suppose, all of this in such a condensed space. Don't forget, this is all being shot, all their souls as well, into the warp. All of this depravity right into the warp. So what happened? Boom! Slaanesh was birthed and killed off 90% of the entire Eldar population. Untold trillions trillions had their souls ripped from their bodies and their actual fleshy bodies devoured by Slaanesh demons. The entirety of the Eldar race was eaten alive and their souls consumed to the Prince of Pleasure. All of them got fucked up. It was so bad that it literally ripped a warp hole into the fabric of the materium called the Eye of Terror. That's literally this like quasi-horrifying gateway.
Oh, is that how the Eye of Terror showed up? Yeah, I was reading some Cadia lore, and I was like, okay, I thought it was just like a naturally occurring, hole in warp space, or a hole into warp space. I didn't realize it was. So was it like the Eldar homeworld or the center of the Eldar Empire that Slaaneshi was like birthed into, right? Like at ground zero, the orgy ground zero, or was it more like Slaanesh just kind of showed up and coalesced somewhere and then went on the path eating up little Eldar?
A portal from the Materium and the Immaterium right next to Cadia, and it is horrifying. So this Slaanesh, also known as She Who Thirsts by the Eldar, slaughtered the entire population except for a couple. Those in the craft worlds were actually not affected by this as they were so far in the reaches of the galaxy. That crazy crack that birth of Slaanesh only affected the ones in the center. So these craft world Eldar were able to escape, but Slaanesh got their sights on them. Every time an Eldar will die, their soul doesn't just pass into the warp naturally. It goes straight to Slaanesh, craft world or not. What about those people in the webway? Well, imagine that giant birth happening, but they were only able to just barely get a grasp onto you. Slaanesh was just barely able to hold on. These people are the Dark Eldar, or also known as the Drukhari. The Eldar population right now is so massively small. It is minuscule.
Massively small. Okay, I appreciate that descriptor.
Compared to any of the other most of the other populations in the universe. The Eldar are consistently having issues trying to get their population up because as their souls are constantly being hungered by from Slaanesh, they realize their entire species is doomed. And they understand it very well. Since the time of the fall, our race has been haunted by what we, in our reckless pursuit of hedonistic indulgence, gave birth to. Though our dreams once overturned worlds and quenched suns, we are now but fitful shadows clinging to the edge of existence. All the stars in the sky cannot blot out the hateful glare of the red moon's eye. The birthing place of the great enemy pulses with all the malice of a demon that is dreaming, casting its shadow over all we have ever done and all we ever shall. Every twisted strand of fate and casting of the runes leads me to this time, to this place, and it is clear that the final battle awaits me at the ancient Crone worlds, a conflict the likes of which has not been seen since the Mon-Kai warred amongst themselves and their corpse of a seer fell to his traitorous son. Is coming, and all my steps lead towards it, no matter that I walk other paths. I see the stars stained red with the blood of the Mon-Kai, and though their wars do not concern me, I would gladly let them destroy one another. I know that to avoid this fight is to condemn my race to inevitable doom, and though all I see is darkness, I know that I will not flinch from my destiny. And now let's talk about cute plastic models.
Okay, yeah, wow, that's pretty dark.
Bro, I'm straight up not having a good time.
The first playable race we have for the Eldar are the Craft World Eldar and living in those Craft World starships I mentioned earlier. And each of them have their own kind of Craft World, almost like a Space Marine Legion. Each Craft World is in itself.
Sorry, I do have a question, though, about Eldar reproduction, right? So I assume Eldar reproduce like people? Do they, a male and a female get together, they make a baby, and that baby grows up into an adult. But that raises the question, like, does the baby not have a soul? Does the soul need to be pulled out of the warp and they can't do it because Slaanesh has all the souls? Or is it like the baby's born, it has a soul, and only when it dies does it transfer to the warp? Or is it just like Eldar don't reproduce, they materialize out of the warp, and whoever's left is all you got? I don't know. Again, lore experts, I depend on you.
Its own special kind of group. And the Eldar themselves are very fast and rely a lot on trickery. They are squishy, a bit weak, but they're very in tune as psychers. Tons of psychers across the entire Eldar population, and their weaponry and abilities are fast and extremely hard-hitting, but of course rather fragile. Understanding an Eldar's brain is an exercise in futility. They are all over the place in confusion and trickery on a whole galactic scale. They fight weird, they think weirder, and Eldar in their own right really rely on this to keep their species alive. They need to think about deception and the strangeness of what they do if they truly want to not be immediately murdered and slaughtered wholesale thanks to their entirely small population. However, I must say that it seems like their population is getting slightly better. These craft worlds hold millions upon millions of people. And as they continually, reproduce and have their craft worlds expand, losing a few people in battle, while hurts a lot, they aren't really losing what's extremely precious to them. It's not like every single death means the death of their species. It seems like they're kind of on the upturn a little bit. They're still a doomed race being sucked into Slaanesh every time someone dies, but they are...
Also, question, that's sort of what happens to human beings, right? Like, they don't, other than perpetuals, they die and then they get reborn. Joe Guardsman, I mean, he just gets chewed up by a Tyrannid or something, and he's gone, right? Maybe he gets welcomed into the little corner of the warp that the Emperor occupies, but he's not coming back. So I'm not sure how the Eldar, think it's a great tragedy and oh, we're doomed to yeah, you're doomed to the same thing that human beings have been going through for 40,000 years.
Definitely doing a little bit better than they were before. Eldar are fast, cunning, and what they don't make up for in tankiness, they make up for in extremely advanced weaponry. They also call humans Monkai, which is something I mentioned earlier. That is a derogatory slur for humans in the Warhammer world. Why is it called Monkai? Well, it's because you can't, in your game, call people monkeys. On the tabletop, exactly what I said. Not very tanky, generally pretty squishy, hit like trucks, and move at Mach 5. Fast, hit hard, die fast. Exactly how it sounds. They've been good for a very long time, too. We bring only...
Yeah, I was reading somewhere that there's, I think it's the Dark Eldar, have a 70% win rate on the tabletop. They're actually problematically overpowered. Yeah, tabletop experts, are the Eldar also have that bias? Are they really favorable on the tabletop? I guess the larger question is, what's the power ranking on tabletop races, right? They're so complicated, there has to be some races or factions more playable and powerful than others. And yeah, curious to know what they are. And yeah, because Games Workshop rebalances with every edition of the game, right?
Only death and leave only carry on. It is a message even a human can understand.
All right, guys, we're going to pause it there. We're at about 35 minutes or so. I just wanted to, again, thank you guys for watching. Let me know if you have other lore videos you want me to check out. Also, yeah, any clarifications? I know Bricky glosses over some things pretty quickly and that the lore is pretty deep, but I really appreciate the fact that he's giving a great baseline of the whole lore. I really feel like I can at least follow conversations, start to get some of the in-jokes. Definitely makes the Emperor's Text-to-Speech Device animated series just a little more comprehensible. So again, be sure to check out the merch store, check out the Instagram, check out the second channel, and until next time, I will see you guys later.